this video, I want to talk to you about our 4 top tips for helping you with your shoulder pain. My name's John, I'm the head therapist here at John W Sports Injury, and what we like to do is help people to achieve their goals, and we do this by helping them improve their flexibility, increase their strength, and ultimately reduce their pain in order to achieve those goals. So if you like our content or want to see more of our tips, then make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that bell so we keep you updated when we've got new content. So before we dive into the shoulder, what I want to talk about is firstly why your shoulder might be hurting, and I want to draw our attention to this term that we call the rotator cuff. Now, what is the rotator cuff? Well, the rotator cuff is the collective name for 4 muscles, and what the role of these muscles is to support our shoulder joint. Now, the shoulder joint has some pros and it has some cons. The pros about our shoulder joint is it's a fantastic joint in terms of the mobility and the movement that it allows. It's what we term a ball and socket joint. Now, what I mean by this is we have at the top of our arm bone, our upper arm bone or the humerus, a ball-like structure which fits nicely into our shoulder blade, which makes a nice socket. Now, the advantage of this type of joint is when we get a ball into a socket, it can roll around, and as a result, it can create a lot of different movement. As we see at our shoulder, we can create lots of different directional movements. So that's a fantastic thing. Now, the downside to our shoulder, particularly when we compare it to our other ball and socket joint in our body, which is the hip, is that it suffers with its stability. So you're probably familiar with shoulders dislocating, and that's because inherently they're not a very stable joint, because they're predominantly it's held in place with the support of some ligament structures by these 4 muscles called the rotator cuff. And as a result, it's quite a lot of pressure on these 4 muscles, and we can often develop dysfunction in them. And there's a good chance that some dysfunction in those muscles or some of the neighbouring muscles are causing you your pain. Now, why does this happen and when does it typically happen? Well, as I mentioned, the shoulder is made up of a ball, the upper arm coming into a socket. Now, what we have where that ball meets the socket is what we call the subacromial space, and it's a space between the ball and the socket. Now, the problem for this is that what we have here is we have the tendons of those muscles of the rotator cuff moving through that space. And when we've got a fully functioning shoulder, then they run through quite happily and the ball rolls around in that socket. But if we develop some dysfunction and some damage to those tendons or some inflammation in particular in those tendons, then all of a sudden this space where the tendons are running happily becomes smaller if the tendons become larger as a result of that inflammation. And what can happen is that all of a sudden then the ball can catch on these and cause what we term an impingement. Now, this typically happens around the 90 degrees of abduction, or this taking our arm away from the body at 90 degrees, we often get this pinch point. So that is happening because we've got a pinching in that space, and that can result in a sharp pain, sometimes almost a feeling of like bone on bone in the area, or we can commonly get referral pains running down the arm as well. So that's why we may get these pains. That's where you might feel and suffer these pains. So what I want to talk about is our 4 top tips to help you to improve those pains. Now, firstly, stretching. What we want to do is have a mobile shoulder. I mentioned earlier in this video that the shoulder is designed to have a lot of mobility. So if we have restrictions in the shoulder, then what we want to do is we want to improve those. So the first thing we can do is we can test our mobility. Now, how do we do this? Well, one nice little test that I like to do is to try and place my hand behind my back, touch my spine, and then reach as high up my spine as possible. And what I would challenge you to do is, for the arm that you might be suffering with some dysfunction, try the other side first, because that will give you your normal position or normal range of motion. Then compare it to the side of dysfunction. Is there a difference there? Is there an imbalance there? That might tell us that we've got a lack of mobility in our shoulder, particularly the muscles at the back. And then we can reverse that. And what we can look to do is bring our arm over the top of our body, and we can look to reach down our spine as far as we go. Again, test the good side first, then the side where you're suffering with pain. Can you get as far down, or is there a restriction in that range of motion? That might be telling us that we're a little bit tight in some of the muscles at the front here, or the triceps. So
they are highlighting to us that stretching might be important. Now, I really like a couple of stretches to help mobility around the shoulder. I like to stretch the back of the shoulder, and vitally, I like to stretch the front. Now, stretching the back of the shoulder, I use what we call the towel dryer stretch. And you can see here, what we like to do is throw the towel over one side of ourselves, and then we reach around with our hand on the side we're looking to stretch to grab hold of that towel. Then with the other hand, so the top hand if you like, we look to pull that up, and you can see that that takes the arm further up that spine in order to create a stretch at the back, and you should be feeling that pull just at the back. Now it's important that we don't take this stretch too far. We don't want to overstretch or create pain, but just to the point where you feel a nice stretch, and then what we look to do is hold that there for 30 seconds. My second favourite stretch for improving shoulder dysfunction is to stretch the muscles at the front, or our pec muscles. Now these become particularly tight in today's society where we often have these rounded shoulders, perhaps working at a keyboard, perhaps doing press up type exercises or bench press exercises, perhaps even just our posture in terms of reading documentation or working on a mouse as well as a keyboard. It creates these rounded shoulders, and that can create this short and tightening in this area. So what we really want to be doing is getting that shoulder back, following that old phrase of stand straight, shoulders back. That's exactly what we want to be doing to prevent these dysfunctions that can occur in our posture. So here what's helpful is to grab hold of something like a door frame. Stand square to that door frame, keep our hips pointing forwards, and then rotate the chest away from that door frame. And again, you should be feeling the stretch through the front, and we want to be holding this stretch for about 30 seconds. And they're my two favourite stretches for improving shoulder dysfunction. Now, secondly, what we can look to do to improve the tissue quality of those muscles is to do rolling. And my favourite piece of kit for this is to use something like a lacrosse ball if you have one, or a hockey ball, or a cricket ball, or even a golf ball. And what you can do is you can look to place this ball up against a wall. Stand with your shoulder blade against the ball, and then what we look to do is lightly move that ball around the back of the shoulder. And what you'll find is some areas where the pain intensifies, or you might even feel a tightening of the tissue. This is what we may term a trigger point. If you find one of these, I'd encourage you just to hold that position with the ball applying pressure to that point. What you should find is after about 30 seconds to a minute, you'll start to feel that tissue desensitize and almost numb, and that can start to relax some of that muscle tissue and will help you with your shoulder pain. If you're feeling particularly brave, we can then take this to lying on the floor and repeating the same thing. So looking to lie onto the ball, place our shoulder blade onto the back of the ball, and roll around until we feel those sore points, and repeat this process. My third tip is that we want to work on our strength. Now, when it comes to improving our shoulder strength, I think there's two components to this. There's the strength side by working in a mobility way, and there's what we term our stability side of the shoulder. Now, the primary role of the rotator cuff is to provide stability to our shoulder. So as a result, I think it's very important, and I often think it's a factor that is overlooked in a lot of people's rehab, that they're assessing that stability. Now, firstly, what we want to talk about is some exercises that might help some of our mobility of the shoulder. And I call these two exercises ins and outs and ups and downs. If we start with ins and outs, now you can take something like a lightweight, a band if you have one, or even something like a water bottle. And the thing with these exercises is form is absolutely key. It's actually more important than any of the weight or the amount of repetitions we're doing, is that we're keeping the correct form. Tuck the elbow into the rib. And sometimes people use something like a tea towel or a pillow in between that elbow and rib, because if they lose the form, that object will drop to the floor. So it's a visual cue to keep that elbow into the rib. Then once we've got the elbow into the rib, what we want to look to do is pull our hand outwards, and that elbow remains tucked in, and that will then be working those stabilizing muscles of the shoulder. A reminder, we shouldn't be suffering pain, but we just want to feel the appropriate muscles working. If you're feeling pain, we're either going too far, probably into this external rotation position, or we're using too high a weight. Our next exercise that I mentioned is what we call ups and downs. Now, again, the form is key here, because what I like to encourage people to do is to take the arm out into a 90 degrees, what I call a 90-90 position. We've got 90 degrees of abduction here, and we've also got 90 degrees of elbow flexion. Now, the key in this form is that that position doesn't change. Our elbow stays in line with the shoulder the whole time. And it's a case of simply rotating up and then rotating back down. So we're internally rotating as far as we can go, and externally rotating. Now, this is a more difficult exercise because we have this arm in that tricky position for the shoulder. So if this one is too difficult for you, not a problem, stick with the ins and outs. But again, we take our arm to that position and we externally rotate, internally rotate. But you notice the key thing here is that this shoulder doesn't change position as we go through range because we want to be working those stability muscles. Now, what we're looking to do here is about 12 repetitions, and we can do that set 2 or 3 times as pain allows. Remember, if you're suffering from pain, drop the weight, or even use no weight. If your form is good, you'll still be getting those benefits. So, the next aspect of strength that I mentioned is our stability. And this is where we actually want to get the shoulder muscles working, but without actually physically moving them. We want them to be stabilizing the joint. And I call these exercises hand taps. And we can start these on our knees. So just drop into hands and knees. And then what you look to simply do is in this position that we term 4.0 is you literally take one hand, tap the other and return it. Now the hand that is moving to tap the other one, that isn't the one that's working, but as you lift that hand off of the floor, the other shoulder muscles have to engage to hold that stability. So the key with this exercise is those shoulders remain deadly still so that you're activating those shoulder muscles. And again, my question to you is, when you lift that hand, do you feel that? Does it create any pain in the other shoulder? That's where we know we've certainly got a shoulder dysfunction. If this is too easy, well, we can progress this exercise in 2 ways. Firstly, you can look to move the knees backwards in order to get a harder workout for the shoulders. And ultimately, you can look to take that exercise onto your toes. So you're almost in the top of a press up position repeating it. And you'll find that to be much more of an intense exercise in order to test that shoulder stability even further. And again, I would look to encourage 10 to 12 repetitions of this exercise with 2 or 3 sets, but it's vital on 2 things. You keep that form good and that we're making sure that our form is correct and that we haven't got pain. If we've got pain, then we don't do that many repetitions or we bring those knees closer. My 4th and final tip, if it's particularly acute, if you're really suffering with some pain in a lot of movements, then some anti-inflammatories by the way of ice might be helpful. So by applying ice into that tip of that shoulder, that bit where you really feel the pinching sensation, will help to reduce some of the inflammation in the area. And what that will allow to do is allow those tendons to run happier in that space. So again, I would recommend about 10 minutes of ice once or twice a day, but we can be doing that daily in order to see those benefits. And then hopefully when you combine all of those 4 things, that's going to look to help to reduce your shoulder pain. Let me know in the comments, is this something that's created some pain for you? Are there new things here that you haven't tried before? This has been something that's some general advice, so it's very important that you're finding a progressive rehab program in order to resolve the symptoms that are individual to you. So if you do have any questions, reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. But I hope you've enjoyed this content. If you've enjoyed this content and you think it's going to help your shoulder, then hit that like button because that's going to help more people to help with their shoulder pain and remind us of the content that you're enjoying getting from us. And don't forget, hit subscribe to that button so we can make sure that we keep you updated on our content. And here's a video that we think might be helpful for you to watch next. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.